I never imagined my life would unravel like this. The moment I found out my wife was cheating on me, everything changed. I had always trusted her, or at least, I thought I did. We built a life together, or so I believed, filled with plans, dreams, and the usual ups and downs of marriage. But beneath the surface, there was a secret she kept from me, a betrayal that cut deeper than I could have ever anticipated. It started with small suspicions. She became distant, her phone glued to her hand, conversations that ended abruptly whenever I walked into the room. At first, I tried to brush it off, maybe work stress, maybe something else weighing on her mind. But my gut told me otherwise. I started paying attention, noticing the little things that didn't add up. Late nights out, unexplained messages, a sudden interest in dressing up more than usual. The signs were there, and I couldn't ignore them. One evening, I stayed up late, pretending to be asleep while I watched her text on her phone. The name that popped up was unfamiliar, a man named Jason. My heart sank as I read the messages, sweet and intimate, words that didn't belong to me. It was undeniable. She was cheating. The betrayal was like a punch to the gut. I felt anger, hurt, disbelief swirling inside me. How long had this been going on? Why? What did I do wrong? But amidst the pain, something else grew inside me, a cold resolve. I wasn't going to be the victim in this story. I was going to fight back. I began gathering evidence. Secretly, I followed her on days she said she was busy with work, documented their meetings, their texts, and their calls. I learned everything about this Jason, his job, his family, his wife. And that's when the idea came to me: if my wife could betray me, I could expose his betrayal too. His wife deserved to know the truth just as much as I did. I reached out anonymously to Jason's wife, sending her proof of the affair. At first, she didn't believe me. But when the evidence arrived, clear and undeniable, the world she thought she knew shattered. Their marriage, once seemingly perfect, began to crumble under the weight of deceit. Meanwhile, I confronted my wife. The conversation was raw and painful. She admitted everything but showed little remorse. Her betrayal was deep, and my heart broke anew. But I didn't let her see the full extent of my pain. Instead, I channeled it into strength. I decided to reclaim my life, to no longer be a pawn in her games. The fallout was messy. Jason's marriage ended in divorce, the shock sending ripples through our social circles. My wife and I separated, the trust irrevocably broken. But through the chaos, I found clarity. I rediscovered myself, my worth beyond the pain she caused. It wasn't easy. There were days filled with doubt and loneliness, nights haunted by memories. But I surrounded myself with friends and family who reminded me I was not alone. I sought therapy to heal the wounds that ran deeper than just betrayal, wounds of self-worth and trust. Slowly, I rebuilt. I found joy in small things and moments of laughter, in new hobbies and passions. I learned to trust again, cautiously, but with hope. And most importantly, I forgave, not to absolve her, but to free myself from the chains of bitterness. Looking back, that dark chapter of my life taught me resilience. It showed me that even in the deepest pain, there's a way forward. I emerged stronger, wiser, and ready to embrace a future defined not by betrayal, but by healing and growth. After the initial storm of betrayal and confrontation, life didn't simply settle into calm. Instead, it felt like I was walking through a long, dark tunnel, unsure if there was any light at the end. Each day brought a new wave of memories, doubts, and emotions crashing over me. Some mornings, I woke up feeling numb, as if my heart had been replaced with stone. Other times, the anger flared so hot it made my hands shake. The divorce was brutal. It wasn't just the legal battles or the division of assets, it was the emotional warfare. Every interaction felt like reliving the hurt. She was unapologetic in many ways, even cold. There was no remorse, no real explanation, just an unspoken dismissal of what we once had. I realized then that her affair wasn't about me or our marriage, it was about her own issues, her own emptiness that she chose to fill with lies. But as difficult as it was, I knew I had to keep moving forward. I refused to let bitterness consume me. I threw myself into work, volunteering with organizations that helped people overcome trauma and rebuild their lives. Helping others gave me a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in a long time. I began to understand that pain can be transformed into strength when used to uplift, not destroy. Jason's wife reached out to me a few months after everything had fallen apart. She thanked me for the truth, even though it had shattered her world. She was kind but still hurting, and we found an unexpected connection in our shared experience of betrayal. Sometimes, life's cruel twists forge strange alliances. We spoke about forgiveness, trust, and how difficult it was to rebuild after someone you love breaks your world apart. I also started therapy, something I had avoided for years, thinking I could handle everything on my own. But I realized healing required more than willpower, it required guidance. In those sessions, I confronted my insecurities, my fears, and the ways my self-worth had been shattered. Bit by bit, I began to reclaim my identity, not as a betrayed husband, but as a man worthy of love and respect. One of the hardest lessons was learning to trust again. Every new relationship was shadowed by fear of betrayal, fear of abandonment. I was cautious, guarded, sometimes even distant. But slowly, I opened myself up, learning that vulnerability was not weakness, but strength. I met someone new eventually, as someone who saw me for who I truly was, scars and all, and chose to stay. That new relationship wasn't perfect, but it was honest. It taught me that love can be beautiful again, even after betrayal. It reminded me that people are complex and flawed, but also capable of growth and redemption. Looking back, the affair that once threatened to destroy me became the catalyst for my transformation. It forced me to face painful truths, to let go of illusions, and to rebuild from the ruins. I'm not the same man I was before. I'm stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. Life taught me that betrayal can shatter you, but it doesn't have to define you. It's what you do after the fall that shapes who you become. The months turned into years, and as time passed, the sharp edges of betrayal began to dull. I wouldn't say I forgot. I don't think anyone truly forgets that kind of pain, but I no longer let it govern my every thought. Instead, I found myself focusing on what lay ahead, not on what had been lost. I moved to a new city. It wasn't an escape, but a fresh start. The familiar streets and places that once held happy memories had become haunted by what they represented, a life that no longer existed. In this new place, I could walk freely without the constant reminder of what had happened. I furnished a small apartment just the way I liked it, filling it with things that reflected who I was now, not who I used to be. Work flourished. I threw myself into new projects, took risks I might have shied away from before. There was something liberating in realizing I had survived my darkest moments. If I could get through that, what couldn't I handle? My colleagues saw the change in me. I was more focused, more driven, but also somehow calmer, more centered. I wasn't chasing approval anymore. I was working for myself, for my future. The connection I had with Jason's ex-wife, Emily, evolved into a quiet friendship. We would check in from time to time, not out of shared misery, but mutual respect. We both knew what it meant to have your world turned upside down. We encouraged each other, celebrated small victories, and reminded one another that we deserve peace. And then, as life often does, it surprised me. I met someone new. It wasn't planned or forced. It happened in the most ordinary of moments, at a coffee shop where I'd gone to escape my thoughts. Her name was Claire. She was kind, with a warmth that felt like sunlight after years of cold. I was cautious at first, unsure if my heart could risk being broken again. But she didn't rush me. She simply offered understanding and patience. With Claire, I learned to trust again. It wasn't easy. Every now and then, fear would creep, and fear that history would repeat itself, that love was just a prelude to pain. But she showed me, in countless small ways, that love could be safe, honest, and real. She listened without judgment, supported without smothering, and loved without conditions. Together, we built something new. Not perfect, nothing ever is, but genuine. I shared my past with her, not as a burden, but as part of who I was. And she accepted it, accepted me, and helped me see that I was more than the scars I carried. There were moments when I still thought about my ex-wife, not out of longing, but reflection. I wondered if she ever regretted what she'd done, if she ever thought about the damage left in the wake of her choices. But I didn't dwell on it. I had forgiven her in my heart, not because she asked for it, but because I needed to let go of the weight. Carrying that bitterness would have only kept me trapped in the past. Jason's life, from what I heard, took a different path. His choices cost him his marriage, his reputation, and in many ways, his peace. I didn't take pleasure in that. I didn't need to. I had already found my own form of justice by moving on and building something better. Now, as I look at the life I've built, I feel proud. Proud that I didn't let betrayal define me. Proud that I turned pain into strength. Proud that I opened my heart again, even when it felt safer to close it off forever. Betrayal broke me once, but it didn't break me forever. Instead, it taught me resilience, compassion, and above all, hope. Clara and I built our life slowly, thoughtfully, without the rush that often comes from trying to fill a void. I think that's what made it different. We weren't trying to erase the past or cover up old wounds. Instead, we acknowledged them, learned from them, and allowed them to shape how we treated each other. There was a quiet understanding between us that love, real love, required patience, honesty, and effort every single day. We spent countless evenings just talking. Sometimes it was about trivial things, movies, books, plans for the weekend. Other times it was deeper in our fears, our hopes, the parts of ourselves we didn't always show to the world. With Claire, I felt safe in a way I hadn't felt in years. There was no pretense, no hidden agenda. She didn't want to change me, and I didn't want to change her. We simply chose each other, day after day. We traveled together, exploring places neither of us had seen before. Every trip felt like a small reclaiming of joy, as if we were collecting moments to replace the ones tarnished by betrayal. I remember standing with her at the edge of the ocean, watching the sun sink below the horizon, feeling at peace. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't haunted by what had been. I was simply grateful for what was. Work continued to thrive, but it no longer consumed me the way it once did. I learned balance. I learned that success wasn't just about achievements or recognition, it was about living a life that felt whole. I mentored younger colleagues, hoping to pass on not just skills, but wisdom about resilience and integrity. I wanted them to know that setbacks didn't define them, that strength could be found even in the darkest places. My relationship with my own family deepened too. For a while, I had kept them at a distance, ashamed of how broken I had felt after the betrayal. But with time, I let them back in. They reminded me of who I was before the pain, and they celebrated who I was becoming because of it. Family dinners, quiet weekends together, shared laughter, these became the foundation of a new kind of happiness. As for my ex-wife, she became a memory that no longer hurt. I didn't wish her ill. I hoped, in some distant way, that she found what she was looking for. But I no longer thought of her with anger or sadness. She was part of a chapter that had ended, and I was living in a new one, one filled with hope and love. Claire and I eventually talked about marriage. Not because we needed a piece of paper to validate what we had, but because we wanted to build a future together. We wanted to create a home that reflected the honesty and strength of our bond. When I asked her to marry me, it wasn't with grand gestures or dramatic speeches. It was simple, heartfelt, and real, just like us. On our wedding day, as I stood beside her, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the journey that brought me here, for the pain that taught me resilience, for the love that taught me to hope again. Our vows weren't just promises to each other, they were acknowledgments of the past, affirmations of the present, and commitments to the future. Life moved forward, as it always does. There were challenges, of course. No life is without them. But together, Claire and I faced them with honesty, compassion, and strength. I often thought about how far I had come from the broken man who once felt lost in the shadow of betrayal to someone who had rebuilt, healed, and found joy again. If I could go back and speak to the man I was on that night I first discovered the affair, I would tell him this: you will survive this. You will grow from this. And one day, you will look back and see that even in your deepest pain, you were finding your way toward something better. Because that's what betrayal taught me. That even when someone tries to break you, you can choose to rise. And when you do, you discover that the life you rebuild can be even more beautiful than the one you lost. As the years went on, the life Claire and I built together became a steady source of comfort and joy. We bought a small house, nothing extravagant, just a cozy place with a garden where she planted flowers and I learned to grow vegetables. It became our refuge, a symbol of the peace we had found together. Mornings were slow and gentle. We'd sit on the porch with coffee, watching the world wake up, grateful for the quiet simplicity that now filled our days. Claire wanted children, and so did I. After all the hurt of the past, I wasn't sure if fatherhood would ever be part of my future, but with her, it felt right. When our daughter was born, I remember holding her in my arms for the first time, overcome with emotion. She was small and perfect, and in that moment, I felt the weight of the past lift just a little more. She represented hope, a fresh start, the proof that love, real, lasting love, could still grow in the soil of heartache. Parenthood wasn't easy, of course. There were sleepless nights, endless worries, and moments when we doubted ourselves. But every challenge brought us closer together. We became a team in the truest sense, leaning on each other, learning from each other, and celebrating the small victories: a first smile, a first step, a first word. I often thought about how different this felt from my first marriage. With Claire, everything was built on transparency. There were sleepless nights, endless worries, and moments when we doubted ourselves. But every challenge brought us closer together. We became a team in the truest sense, leaning on each other, learning from each other, and celebrating the small victories: a first smile, a first step, a first word. I often thought about how different this felt from my first marriage. With Claire, everything was built on transparency. The man who stayed up at night wondering if he'd ever feel whole again. I didn't resent him. He was part of me, and he taught me how to endure. But I no longer let him steer my future. Instead, I honored him by living a life that proved he had survived, that he had grown stronger. The world didn't stop bringing challenges. There were job changes, health scares, moments of grief when we lost loved ones. But each hardship reminded me of what I'd learned: that we are defined not by what happens to us, but by how we choose to respond. And with every test, I chose to respond with love, with courage, with the belief that even the hardest times pass and leave behind new beginnings. Sometimes, people from my old life would reach out: old friends, former colleagues, even people who had known my ex-wife. They'd ask how I was, and I'd answer honestly, I was good. Not perfect, not without struggles, but good in the way that matters most. I had built a life that felt true to who I was and who I wanted to be. As our daughter grew, she began asking questions about family, about love, about what makes a marriage strong. I told her the truth, in ways she could understand: that love is about choosing each other every day, even when it's hard. That honesty matters more than perfection. That mistakes can break us, but they can also teach us how to be better. And when she's older, I'll tell her more. I'll tell her about the time I thought my world had ended, and how it hadn't. How it had, in fact, just begun. How pain shaped me, but didn't destroy me. How betrayal taught me the true meaning of loyalty, and loss showed me the true value of love. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, I sit in the garden, watching the sun set, and I think about how far I've come. I think about the broken man who once stood at the edge of despair, and the man I am now: a husband, a father, a survivor. And I feel at peace. Betrayal was a chapter in my story, but not the whole story. The whole story is one of resilience, of choosing hope, of building a life that is honest and full of love. And that, I've learned, is the greatest victory of all. As the seasons passed, I found myself appreciating the small moments more than I ever had before. It wasn't the grand events that defined happiness anymore, it was the quiet, everyday moments that stitched our life together. The sound of my daughter's laughter as she played in the backyard. The way Claire's hand found mine when we walked down the street. The smell of coffee brewing in the kitchen on a Saturday morning. These were the things that reminded me of how far I'd come, how far we had come. Our daughter, Sophie, grew into a curious, kind-hearted child. She asked questions about everything. Why is the sky blue? Why do people hurt each other sometimes? What makes someone a good person? And each question made me reflect on my own journey, on the choices I'd made, and the lessons I'd learned. I wanted to give her honest answers, not to protect her from the hard truths of life, but to help her navigate them with strength and compassion. Clara and I faced challenges, of course. No marriage is without them. There were times when stress from work, from parenting, from life itself, made us short with each other. There were disagreements, moments of doubt, times when we had to remind ourselves why we chose each other in the first place. But we always came back to the promise we made at the beginning to talk, to listen, to fight for what we had rather than letting silence or resentment grow between us. And each time we did, our bond grew stronger. There were also moments of deep joy. I remember the day Sophie rode her bike without training wheels for the first time. The way her face lit up with pride and excitement, and the way Clara and I cheered for her as if she'd won a gold medal. I remember family vacations where we got lost on country roads and laughed until our sides hurt. I remember late nights on the porch with Claire, the two of us wrapped in a blanket, talking about our dreams for the future. As the years went on, I found myself thinking less and less about the betrayal that had once consumed me. It didn't haunt me anymore. It didn't define me. Instead, it became something distant, like a scar that had faded with time. A reminder of what I'd survived, but no longer a source of pain. I realized that forgiveness, real forgiveness, wasn't about excusing what had been done to me. It was about releasing myself from the weight of anger and bitterness, about choosing peace over resentment. I also saw my ex-wife once, unexpectedly, at a grocery store. We exchanged a polite nod, nothing more. In that moment, I felt no anger, no sadness. Just a quiet acceptance that we were the people who had once shared a life, and who had both moved on. I wished her well in my heart and walked away, grateful for the life I had now. Clara and I grew older together, and with age came new challenges, health scares that reminded us of our fragility, friends and family we said goodbye to, changes that tested our resilience. But through it all, we held onto each other, knowing that what we'd built together could withstand whatever storms came our way. Sophie eventually left for college, chasing her own dreams, and the house felt quieter without her. But Clara and I found new ways to fill the space with shared hobbies, with community work, with simple pleasures like tending the garden or cooking together. And every so often, Sophie would come home, and the house would fill again with the warmth of her presence, with laughter and conversation that stretched late into the night. Looking back, I sometimes marveled at how much a single moment of betrayal had once threatened to define my life, and how, in the end, it had only shaped me into someone stronger, someone more compassionate, someone who knew the value of honesty and love. I had taken what could have destroyed me and used it to build something beautiful. If there's one thing I hope Sophie learns from me, it's that strength isn't about never falling. It's about rising after you fall. It's about choosing love when it would be easier to close your heart. It's about building a life that reflects your truest values, no matter what storms you face. And as I sit now, watching the sun set over our quiet street, with Claire beside me, I know without doubt or regret that I am exactly where I am meant to be. Not in spite of the past, but because of it.